All right, I think we're good to go.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm going to be the lead-off hitter here and walk us through the first couple of pieces of our agenda for today. We're really excited to welcome everybody back. We've got some great teams, and then we know some really powerful work that's already happening. Oop. Hey, am I hearing an echo? Okay, cool. And just before we really get into the meat of the agenda, Gretchen, can you advance to the next slide? Mm-hmm. So here are our community agreements. So we want to just accept that we may not solve all of the problems, so we may end this without closing out every issue, but we encourage everybody to speak their truth, experience discomfort, stay engaged, take an inquiry stance. So these will be important rules of the road to keep in mind as we engage in today's activities. All right. So what we have found is that it's useful to have some provocations or to get our juices flowing and to imagine what's possible. Gretchen, can you hit the next slide?
Yeah.
And one opportunity or one provocation that I want to put forward is this this little short video from the Olin College of Engineering. It's going to explain a little bit about what it is and why, and I think it will become clear about why we're showing it. But we just want we're offering this up not as the guiding light for how we're going to think about our design process, like what we're aiming towards, but it's to provoke some broader thinking about what we want for our students and what we want for our communities. So as you watch this short video, I'm going to ask you in the chat to start thinking about where do you see alignment between your aims as a team and the mission of a place like Olin. So it's just to have that lens when you're watching this video. Gretchen, you ready to hit it?
I'm ready.
Go for it.
The world has changed, and the skill set that's going to be most important for the 21st century is not the same skill set as the one that we created in the 1950s.
Maybe the way to try to drive some change in engineering education is by actually starting a new college completely from scratch.
Olin's an engineering school where you understand that there's a fundamentally different definition of engineering. It's about deeply understanding the world and what it needs.
So the way to think of Olin is it's not actually a college, it's a form of national laboratory.
We have a lot less lecture and a lot less of the student sits here and the professor sits here and knowledge flows this direction.
Just sitting there watching someone draw stuff or write stuff on the board and you copy it down and you call it a day, it never quite works for me. We're trying to develop a fully autonomous robotic fish that is capable of crossing the Atlantic Ocean using a propulsion method that is entirely based on biological fish. I have to solve my own problems. I have to figure out what I need to know. I have to go find that knowledge and then apply it. It sticks around for a lot longer.
So rather than listening to how it could be done, you actually do it and experience it.
Before I came, the 50-50 split wasn't really a thing I realized I cared about. And then I got here and I realized how much I liked having other women around.
The entrepreneurial mindset really is threaded through the curriculum, and we've seen really successful student groups who have spun off a small company while they've been at Olin as they've left Olin.
Scope is our senior capstone project.
We bring in companies from outside with real problems, and then the Olin students examine the problem, come up with a solution. The companies love it. We have more companies knocking on our door than we can possibly fit in the program.
Employers tell us it's as if they have 3 to 5 years of experience when they leave, because they actually have 3 to 5 years of experience when they leave.
senior executives require employability skills, digital fluency, and innovation science. And Olin students are graduating with those skills. It's truly differentiating.
The number of places our students go and the number of organizations that want them is, I think, all the evidence you need that we must be doing something right.
About 40% of Olin's alumni so far have continued to undergraduate work. About 25% of the kids who continue on go to either Harvard, Stanford, or MIT. The National Academy of Engineering created a list of what they call the grand challenges, 14 problems that we will have to solve in order to continue life as we expect it.
There are critical problems to solve. They have substantial technical components, but they also have really critical economic, political, social components. We have a large fraction of our students that are doing the Grand Challenge Scholars Program.
Both here in the United States and overseas, more and more people are looking at Olin as a model for the future.
Our job isn't just to come up with a new recipe to teach engineering, it's to give that recipe away to anybody who wants it.
At present, we probably have about 3 institutions visiting a week.
Schools like the University of Illinois, like the University of Texas at El Paso, like Delft University.
Olin is doing enormously powerful work with other institutions in the world. By investing in Olin, you're making a difference in education on a very broad scale.
Okay. So I would like to invite everyone to consider the question from a personal perspective. Where do you see alignment between your aims as a team and the mission of a place like Olin? So we're just pushing our thoughts, pushing our vision. We're not here to recreate Olin. This is just a way of expanding our ideas about what's possible and what we want. And so if in the chat, everybody could put at least one response to that question. Where do you see alignment between your aims as a team and the mission of a place like Olin? While you're typing, I will disclose that I, in one of my professional experiences, designed 2 high schools. And we used Olin as a sort of map for how we were thinking about what would the high school experience need to be in order to create students who would be capable and excited to go to a place like Olin. And we were lucky enough actually to take a design team all the way up to Olin and participate in a week-long design session using and supported by their faculty. It's a really amazing place. I secretly am trying to encourage my children to think about going there. So, not so secretly. They have a lot of Olin swag. So awesome. Thanks. Yeah. So hearing it from stakeholders, making learning really relevant. Community and collaboration, thinking outside the box. These are great examples. So as we're doing this work today, we wanted to offer up that provocation in order to get our juices flowing about what we might be designing towards and designing for. And so just keep that in mind, keep these responses in mind as we're continuing on. Gretchen, next slide. I love this video, but I don't want to watch it again. our agenda for today, we're going to actually get grounded first in a really big idea called targeted universalism. That is a way of thinking about careful user-centered design to address equity issues. And then we'll use that frame to think about what we heard in the empathy interviews that we've conducted. And then we'll map those ideas onto some, like, just with tensions in mind and things that we're hearing from different people. And then hopefully we'll find enough time to get to user profiles and start thinking about, well, what additional interviews might we need to do in order to make sure that we've got the right perspectives at the table and in our minds. All right. It's like video day. It's like delightful. So this idea of targeted universalism is it's actually a legal framework, and that comes out of the university space, but it is a really, really critical and important frame for addressing equity issues. And so we're going to watch a quick video. It's quite short, but it is dense. So it's like a really powerful story with some powerful visuals, but it really like dial in because it's got some thoughtful and provocative ideas that I just want to clue you in to engage with. All right, hit it. I'm not hearing anything. Gretchen, I think you're muted, so I think it's maybe not allowing you.
Let's try this again.
In our society. Universal approaches are widely used to package policies for broad. What is the most effective and sustainable policy response to problems in our society? Universal approaches are widely used in order to package policies for broad appeal. Universal policies such as Social Security and minimum wage provide the same benefits or minimum protections to everyone, regardless of status or group membership. But by treating everyone the same, universal approaches can't root out group-based discrimination and may actually deepen inequality between groups rather than reduce it. And by providing benefits or protections to everyone, resources that could be targeted to groups worse off instead flow to those who are better off. In contrast to universalism, targeted approaches are commonly used. Targeted policies provide benefits or protections based on group membership or status. SNAP, the food stamp program, conditions benefits on income level. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires public accessibility for disabled groups. And affirmative action focuses on historically disadvantaged groups. Targeted approaches are vulnerable to the critique that they unfairly favor constituent groups over the public good by directing resources to marginalized groups who are already subjected to unfair stereotypes. But universal and targeted approaches are false choices. There is a third way, targeted universalism. Targeted universalism means setting universal goals that can be achieved through targeted approaches. This approach targets the various needs of each group while reminding us that we are all part of the same social fabric. This can be accomplished by following 5 steps. First, set a universal goal. For example, 100% proficiency in 8th grade math. Second, measure how the overall population fares relative to the universal goal. In this example, we might discover that only 80% of 8th graders are proficient in 8th grade math. Third, measure the performance of population segments relative to the universal goal. So although 80% of all 8th graders are proficient, we might find that only 70% of Latinx students are proficient. Fourth, understand how structures and other factors support or impede groups' progress toward the universal goal. For our Latinx students, classroom instruction materials and lessons designed for English speakers may impede learning, including math proficiency. Finally, implement targeted strategies so that each and every group can achieve the universal goal based upon their needs and circumstances. This may take the form of ESL-specific math tutoring for our Latinx students, while another group may require a completely different strategy to achieve the same universal goal. Targeted universalism rejects a blanket universal, which may be indifferent to the reality that different groups are situated differently relative to the institutions and resources of society. By aspiring toward shared universal goals, targeted universalism empowers targeted strategies capable of achieving those goals while moving us beyond concerns over disparities alone and toward our highest aspirations for all.
Okay. If you could advance to the next slide, Gretchen, whenever you get a chance.
I don't know why it keeps doing that. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I promise I'm
So-
telling it to advance. It just is really mad and doesn't want to.
So the idea of target universalism is that universal solutions don't really can actually make gaps larger because it's giving more to people who already have, access to some of those resources because it's giving it to everybody. So it can actually expand gaps. And targeting those who experience the greatest marginalization and lack of resources can be divisive because it's stigmatizing and can create an issue. So the way to square the circle, according to the target universalism lens, is to start with a universal goal and then build targeted solutions that address inequities and address the barriers that are experienced by different groups. If we just acknowledge that different groups do experience different access to resources. And doing it in this way is more resource efficient and more equitable. So that's our claim. Gretchen, and you're the next slide.
So we thought we might give an example of this that is a little closer to home than Social Security from the video, which is last spring for all of us. Last spring, in the now infamous spring of 2020, suddenly COVID hit, suddenly schools closed, suddenly everybody had to be in remote learning. And we all identified this goal. It was, it's not like anyone stood up and put a stake in the ground, but every educator you talked to around the country had the same goal at the same time, which was to ensure continued access to learning for each and every child. And we were really concerned about how to do that. And we saw some very obvious barriers. Not all kids had devices. Some schools' technology policies actually forbid students from taking devices home. So there was a lot of stuff around devices. We also knew that not everybody had reliable internet access. So even if they had devices, would they be able to engage? And then we also had questions about variability and at-home support, not knowing how long this was going to last and what support would kids even need to do this well. And when you imagine trying to find a universal solution, which is very often the way that we operate in schools, we want to be able to give everybody the same, whatever it is, the same access, the same information, the same stuff, the same time. When you imagine doing that with these problems, we saw some things occur that were like not really what people wanted, and they did things differently this fall. So universal devices, for example, some folks decided they needed to purchase devices for everybody and sent them out with everybody. Some folks asked who has devices and who doesn't, and then figured out where to provide those devices and where that was necessary or not necessary. And that led to a different use of resources, obviously. But if you tried to do it universally, you would spend a lot of money and probably spend it in places you don't need it, which some of us did. Same is true with internet. In some communities, the school districts didn't have any idea what people's home internet access was like. And so they just real quick did a lot of really good scrappy work to ask people like, who has internet, who doesn't? And for the most part, we tried a targeted solution for that. We tried to give hotspots out, in places, buses delivering food in hotspots around cities, around the country, and other ways too, to make that targeted assistance available. But what if we had universally bought computers? What if you'd universally sent out hotspots? And then we consider at-home support, and we'd look at that and go, well, we can't universally do that. That's just too big. It's too big and it's too hard. We don't have the resources to send people out to all the houses. It's just not possible. And so most of us didn't consider very much about at-home support in the beginning because a universal option really wasn't available. And then some people who did universal things in the first two categories later kind of felt like, oh, dang, I wish we'd used resources differently. And so, the questions are, when we use resources that way, who do we not end up supporting? Who ends up not getting the resources? Who ends up not having help with the barrier that's preventing them from accessing our universal goal? So if our goal is every kid has continued access to learning when in remote learning, a universal approach ends up hurting the same people who are probably most disadvantaged in a normal circumstance. And this is how some districts reflected on, their springs last spring. So just wanted to offer that as a common example for us. So kind of going back to that language again, if targeted universalism is to begin with a universal goal and then determine some targeted solutions because it better addresses inequities and because it actually is also more cost efficient a lot of times, there is another thing that sometimes happens, which I'm going to call collateral benefits. In military actions, we talk about collateral damage, right? Which is damage done on accident that you didn't mean to do. There are sometimes also collateral benefits. For those of you who've hung around design thinking for some time and user-centered design, those folks talk about the phenomenon of extreme users. And that very often when you design for extreme users, the products are really good for a lot of other people. And the same thing is true of targeted universalism. When you target a group and really try and design something for them, a lot of times that turns out to also be better for others. And like some examples of that are like, if you know the OXO Good Grips tools in your kitchens, they like have really big handles. They're way more comfortable to use. I have an OXO can opener. Is really nice soft handles I use, and the knob that you turn to open cans is also really big. That was designed by designing for elderly people who had limited hand dexterity from arthritis and things like that. But it turns out who have none of those health issues, just prefer the OXO tool. It's actually easier for me to use too. And the example here on the screen is another one of those, right? We made sidewalk cutouts because people with disabilities needed to be able to access sidewalks. And for folks that were in wheelchairs or using other kind of aids to get around, curbs were hard. And so we cut these out. But when we did that, it turned out to also be great for, moms with strollers, little kids on bikes who shouldn't maybe be riding on the street yet, or kids on big wheels. If you are one of my kids who spent a lot of time on those when they were little. So, it isn't always true that targeted universalism has these collateral benefits, but it is often true. And in our design, we're going to try and keep that in mind, try and look for ways that when we design for those who are furthest from opportunity, who are experiencing barriers in the most pronounced way, how can that design be a benefit to others?
So this is one of the core ideas about how we're going to approach design, and the targeted universalism concept is really critical to coming at things with an equity lens and designing for that. And so we want to spend a little bit of time engaging with some of the key quotes from the video and to have a virtual discussion about them. And so we're going to do what's called the 4A's protocol. I've put a link to the Padlet where we're going to have our virtual discussion. And so click on that and it should take you to a beautiful flowing blue screen. And we're going to do what's called the 4A's protocol. For each of the quotes, there's 4 quotes listed across the Padlet. You can double click underneath the agree, argue, aspire, or assumption box and write a note that corresponds to that quote. So for example, if you look at this quote and you think, wow, I really agree with the idea that we need to reject a blanket universal, then you could put that into a note and you could put that underneath the agree column. If there's something in the quote that you argue with, then write that, and then you can put that underneath the argue. Aspire is for something that you read and you're inspired to want to aspire to it. So like, oh, I want to be more like that. I want that. And then the assumption is naming an assumption that's embedded in the quote. Like, there's an assumption that people are situated differently relative to the institutions and resources of society. Although I would say there's plenty of data to support that. But so you can name these things and name what you see in the quote and your reactions to it and put them underneath each of those columns. If you scroll to the right, there are 3 additional quotes. So you can, if you're on a Mac, you can scroll using 2-finger scrolling. If you are in a PC, you can move the bars at the bottom of the page, okay? So we're gonna give everybody just about 7 minutes or so to go into the Padlet and just react to the quotes. So you can double click in order to create a note. Okay? Go for it. I'll set a little timer. Go ahead and wrap your last note. And these are, I've done this protocol in a number of communities, and these are really powerful reflections. And I'm just so thrilled and excited about the power of this group. I mean, it's clear that there's deep thinking and really powerful energy in this team and these sets of teams. So I'm really excited to continue this conversation. We will be looping back a lot to the idea of targeted universalism. But Gretchen, if you could go back to the slides, that'd be awesome. So hopefully you can take a scan at other people's ideas as well as we're moving along. There's, we're going to be approaching targeted universalism with the idea that these universal goals are important and that different people need different supports in order to attain those universal goals. And what you've done by engaging with the empathy interviewing process is to more deeply understand what people's barriers are. And so we have a group of users that we have deeper insights about now because of the interviews that you've done. And we need to think about solutions that are targeted towards those who need the most support, who experience the greatest barriers. And really good solutions will also have collateral benefits for others if we apply them more broadly, even if we're going to start with our focus on those who experience the greatest barriers. But we need to make sure that the solutions we create are feasible. And so in order to do that, we're going to take our users' needs into account in a sort of hierarchical order. First, we're going to focus on students, especially those students with the greatest barriers to sustained and engaged and meaningful learning. Then we're going to think, all right, well, how about through the lens of those families of those learners? Like, how can we also think about what barriers they experience? And then also then think about educators who support those learners. So we're going to focus our solution creation and empathy building and insight generation on students whose experience matters, and then kind of move through these other categories as well, thinking through the lens of like, well, what is their experience? How might they experience these issues as well? As we shared last time, we are focusing our work, or we're building our work through the lens of liberatory design. And we're going to be moving between two arms of this diagram. We're going from seeing the system and empathizing to identify some of the key challenges. And then we're going to also be moving into the space of defining the challenge and defining the insights that we hear from people. So this is the next meeting, this meeting, and then the next one, and we'll be focusing on that transition. All right. So we are about to bump you into some of your rooms, but we want to make sure that you have like kind of gleaned and thought about what are the most important things that you've heard from people during your empathy interviews. And so we're going to give you a few minutes to pull out quotes and emotions to make sure that you understand the context of the person who said it. But what is it that they say are some of their greatest issues or barriers? And so when you're thinking about these things, we want you to consider, think about the students, think about families, then educators, and then where are people experiencing the strongest feelings? And then where, if you're not quite sure how to start that thinking, you can just sort of see where are people feeling the most like sure or certain, or and then where are they feeling the most unsure? Where are they kind of signaling joy when you talk to them? When was their voice kind of the most excited? And then when were their voices or their emotions like highest anxiety? And so by zeroing in on some of those things from your empathy interview notes, you'll be able to pull out some of the most important quotes. So the next slide will show you an example of what we're hoping that you'll write out now. So looking at your interview notes, jotting down and sort of circling and writing, noting note here, you might write a note like this. At the top of it, educator mom, that's the context of the person that you heard this from. So for you, some of you, it might be, you know, a student, and you might want to give a little bit of context about the student. You know, are they a middle schooler, are they elementary schooler? Do they have an IEP and needs to have special needs, and so on. And then you pull out the quote, like this mom said to me, like, well, I don't know, when do I jump in and when do I shut my mouth? Like, how do I figure out what to do to support my child? She was talking about like how to support her kids. And the feeling I'm labeling as anxiety, fear of doing the wrong thing, doing too much or doing too little. So we're going to give you a few minutes, just go through your documents and see, well, what kind of quotes do you want to pull out, and what kind of insights do you want to gather? Are there any questions about that? You can throw them in the chat if you have a question, or raise your hand. Okay. All right, so this is an individual work time. If you aren't sure about, or you don't have notes from an interview, you can just be thinking about some people that you know and some opportunities or times when you've gotten a chance to see things that create anxiety for them as it relates to schooling, as it relates to their educational experience. So if you have a young person in your life, or if you have, if you are a young person, you think of a friend. If you're an educator, you can think about an educator friend, you can think about yourself, you can think about a colleague. And if you don't have interview notes that you've conducted sometime over the past week. All right. Okay. Wanted to give you a second to just go into that review mode from your notes. We're now going to send you into small groups based on some teaming. And we are giving each of your small groups a Padlet. And so all of the notes that you just gathered, all of those big insights, those really, really powerful emotions and experiences, you're going to tag them and put them onto a Post-it note, just like we did for the Target Universalism. You're going to put those in. We've created some groupings like family engagement and empowerment, personalized learning, social-emotional wellness and health. So those could be some groupings for your notes. There could be some of the key themes, but of course, create new theme buckets if you need. Go ahead and create ones that if none of those match what you've heard from people, those are just some presumptions that we thought probably came up somewhere. So once you have all of your ideas popped up, then you can start to sort them. You might find that a continuum shows something like more student agency versus less student agency, like big kind of, you can start to sort your notes out on that. Like some people may have said they want more support. Some may say they need less support or want more hands off. Like that's going to be you might start to sort and see some patterns there. But if you just group them as a start, that's a great place to begin. You'll start to see some themes there. The second thing that you're going to do in groups is start to discuss, where are you seeing the strongest emotions? What are the biggest dilemmas that your families and students are facing when it comes to your district and your work in your community? And so those are the two tasks for your work now. And I'm just putting the big questions here before we send you off into groups. Any questions?
Donnie, how much time do we have in our group? I think it's a while, isn't it?
Yeah, I think people are going to need at least, I would say, 20 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes. Because this is the place where, back to Deanne's point before in the chat, this is the place where you're starting to really hear about and think about and understand what some of the biggest priorities might be for your work. Okay, so take the time. And these are the big questions, okay? All right.
A high achieving straight A student. And I think sometimes we just assume they're good, she's good. You know, she is like, I don't even feel like I have to look at her grades in PowerSchool because she has been a 4.0 student for as long as there's been actual grade, you know, letters tied to her grades. But what I learned was that she's actually really quite stressed because she's in advanced classes and she's, you know, again, she's high achieving and she's had a couple teachers that have missed a lot of school this semester for different things. And that's created some inconsistencies in her learning, gaps and styles. And so it was interesting to kind of hear that, you know what, I learned that she probably feels more angst in her learning than I realized. Because again, I think we kind of look at those really high achieving kids and go, they're good, man. They're knocking it out of the park. And when I started asking her some of these questions, she's like, Mom, I'm stressed about this and the teacher's in and out and I don't feel prepared. And so that the class and I have created this group chat to try to help each other. And when I asked her the question about when she feels most supported, she said, with my peers. She said, she's got this group of friends in this advanced math class that have this group that they've created. And that was kind of where her response went, that she feels most supported with them. So it was interesting.
Wow, that is so great. You know, I think the process, it really challenged me. And I think it goes back to, I think Gretchen has mentioned this, we think we know, but then this whole new, to me, it's new way of just gathering information. I don't know, it just shined the light on experiences and, you know, it challenged me to go deeper. And the act of that listening, I go back to like my days when I learned about active listening and kind of put on a counselor hat, like, tell me how that makes you feel. Or, you know, and as an educator, we probe a lot. It's yes or no questions. But I think this is going to be kind of a game changer for me personally and how I evoke feedback, particularly from stakeholders. So thank you for sharing. That was super poignant.
Wait for everybody to get on back here. Hi, everyone. So I'm actually going to give you just a quick direction and then send you back out, but it's only going to be for like a minute because I want each group to be able to share out before we end today. And so back in your groups, I want you just to think about these couple of things. You can have a brief share out with the group, which is, do you have a particular quote that you collected that you want to share because you think it really highlights a theme that you're interested in? And then could you name a theme that's emerging, something that you think you might want to focus on as you try to design some strategies together in your community? Okay, so I'm going to send you back to breakouts, but it's only going to be for a hot minute to identify someone who's going to share out a key quote and a theme that's emerging. All right. Fargo team, I know this is hard. There's a lot of you. You're all going to be like, no, I want to share. No, I want to share. Yeah, you're going to have to work that out. Okay. All right, here you go. Back into your rooms.
We kind of have like an emerging theme coming about how and when and where do we reach out to our school or the teachers, coming from a parent's perspective. Not sure what the process is, especially in high school when there's so many different teachers.
That is a common theme for people in secondary, for sure, is how to do that effectively. Thank you for sharing. How about those who are in breakout 2, which is a combination, I think, of some Minot folks and some Regional Education Center folks.
Yeah, so one, I guess, theme that came out of our conversation was just related to this idea of continuing to figure out how we engage or capture the voice that just isn't at the table. You know, this idea of, you know, we know who's engaged and who's going to show up for, you know, different events and conversations to provide input, but often who we really need to hear from isn't at the table. So we certainly have not figured that out, but that's, I think the theme for us is to try to continue to work on that.
Thank you. And how about the Fargo team?
So I'll share. This was from a interview with a staff person. I had this under family empowerment, but this could very well go under social and emotional as well. The quote was, "As a teacher, I feel defeated when I know a student is struggling. A student could not or would not open up about experiences from outside the classroom." And just thinking about, you know, the amount of trauma that some of our students are dealing with in personal life. And, you know, depending on the age level, maybe it's not something they necessarily have the vocabulary to express, even if they would make the choice to share that. And, you know, I think that kind of highlights the need for more engagement with the family, just to figure out where these experiences are at in their life and how we can support them through that.
Thanks for sharing. So I'm hearing from your teams some themes beginning to emerge, and one of those themes being a desire to hear from others. And so when we talk about going forward in this process, I want to tell you a little bit about where we're headed next week, so you guys can make some decisions. So where we're headed is to build some user profiles. And a profile is just like a collection of, like, let's say in your team you talked to 7 students, and a theme for a good number of those students was that they really had confusion about how to access support when they were struggling at school. Then we could build a student user profile that is a, you know, fictionalized student that's like, you know, confused Carla, you know, and we can pull some quotes from actual interviews from students where they're talking about that issue. We can identify the compelling needs that confused Carla has, you know, that she is having trouble accessing help, that she doesn't know where to begin to access help, whatever compelling needs emerge when we listen across those different kids to put them into one place. And some insights about how that person is feeling, so that we then can design together. Because one of the things that happens a lot in this kind of process is you hear from folks and you hear these themes, and then you try and figure out, like, where do we get started? And a user profile is a pretty helpful way to focus so you can decide where to get started. And so that's where we're going to be heading next week. But between now and then, some of you may want to do more empathy interviews, right? It may be that you heard from folks that were kind of easy to get a hold of, which is totally normal, right? Like, that's who you can get a hold of, is who's around you. But maybe having had a little practice, you're feeling a little more confident. Maybe you could reach out to some channels and reach out to some kids or some families that are not the folks that you usually or easily are connected to. It might be that you work through others to get those invitations. When we were working with the Alliance, in some cases, the school counselor helped make some introductions for people for interviews. And you all might do that too. Think about who could you talk to that could put you in connection with someone who could offer you a different perspective than what you've heard already. But we'd encourage you to try and hear some more before we're back together next time, if that's at all possible. And if you feel like you need to, I don't know, Fargo, you're a big team and you may have collected a ton already, but other teams, you have a little heavier lift with not so many teammates working with you. And so that might be a good use of time between now and next week, which our first call next week is on Monday. And then when we are together, we are, like I said, going to build these user profiles. The last note I'll make, because I know we're at time, is that if your theme has started to emerge and you're going to do more interviews, an opportunity you have is to change your questions up a little bit to really dig into that theme. So if in my sample of confused Carla, if that was a theme, I may make sure I ask students a question about, when was a time when you were confused and you were able to get really great support? When was a time when you were confused and you never found support? You know, I might focus in some questions on that theme. So you might consider that as you go forward too. So it's our end time. So we're going to go ahead and wrap. I really appreciated visiting you guys and hearing some, and also just watching, you know, sitting where I am, I'm watching all the Padlets on my screen. I think you have asked some good questions and heard some important things already from folks in your community. And so it's an exciting beginning. And I know listening to some of you, it's different asking questions this way. What you hear is different, and how connected you are to the person is different too. And so I just want to notice that you all are doing a good job empathy interviewing if you're having that kind of experience. So hats off to you. And I will stay on if anyone has questions about anything between now and next week. But otherwise, I think we'll wrap up. Paul, do you have anything you want to say as we wrap?
Yeah. Tamara is asking, will the Padlets be saved?
Oh yeah, they're there for you, and you can share that link with anyone you want to.
And there's some discussion between Deanne and Matt about connecting with counselors to follow up with some additional folks to interview.
Great.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Sorry, the chat was hidden behind my countdown timer on my screen.
That's why I mentioned it.
Thank you. And the many Padlets. I have so many things open right now. All right, well, again, great start, everybody. It's exciting to see what you're already hearing and learning. And I'm really looking forward to next week when we dig into user profiles. And if you have questions, just hang on the line and we'll help answer questions.